Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon, and today I'm joined by Melissa Connor-Santos. Melissa is the founder and CEO of Oceanview Behavior Solutions and a nationally recognized expert in applied behavior analysis and ACT therapy. With over 15 years of experience, she works at the intersection of clinical excellence and compassionate care, consulting with schools, training professionals, and mentoring families. She is a full-time ABA faculty member at Felician University, a certified PFA SBT Level 6 Supervisor, and a leading voice in school-based behavioral support. Melissa also brings a personal lens to her work as a parent of a child with a behavioral disorder, an experience that deepens her commitment to ethical, strengths-based care. We're excited to have Melissa on the show today to explore how acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, can be used to bridge gaps in traditional social skills instruction for children with autism and behavioral differences, blending evidence-based practice, personal insight, and emerging research to reframe how we support emotional regulation, internal narratives, and long-term well-being. Melissa, it is so great to have you on the show today. Welcome.
I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So to get us started today, can you share a bit about your background and how your path went from preschool teacher to behavioral analyst? What types of things drew you into working with children with autism and behavioral differences?
You know, I think my origin story is really similar to a lot of people I hear in the field, in that I sort of stumbled upon this role by accident. You know, in my young 20s, I had a bachelor's degree in theater, and I was sort of flailing around as one does at that age, trying to figure out what the heck I was doing with my life. And I began teaching, and I was teaching very young children at that time, almost preschoolers and then later preschool. And I decided to go back to graduate school to get my teaching degree, because it was just one of the only jobs in that time in my life that I realized that I was sticking with. So I would do another job, and I would be there for a little bit, and then I'd be like, "Oh, I really don't like this," or like, "This really isn't for me." But then I would do some sort of teaching job or some job with kids, and I would stick around for a longer period of time. And so that was sort of when I finally was like, okay, like, I think this is probably it for me. I better go back and get some more education. How I ended up in special education and then later in specifically children with autism and other neurodevelopmental disabilities was, like I said, kind of an accident. I was working as a preschool teacher of, standard general education preschool kids, right? And I was making no money, like none at all.
No.
Early childhood educators make very little money, and they make even less money when they're doing it in some sort of private school, which is exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I was going to grad school, and I was talking to somebody in my class whose name was also Melissa. Interestingly enough, we were the two Melissas in that class. And I was having some conversation with her about what I was doing. And I think I was sort of lamenting probably not making any money and needing to make more money, or having 4 different jobs in addition to this preschool gig I was doing. And she said, "Oh, you should come work and apply at the school that I'm working at. We're always looking for people." And it was a specialized school for children with autism. And at this point in my life, I had no interest in working with special ed kids. The goal was to be a kindergarten teacher in a public school. Like, that was like what I had planned to do. Is I was going to go work in kindergarten, and I was going to work in general education. But I ended up going on the interview, and they offered me the job. First of all, they were like paying me a salary, like not hourly, which was like, it was so
That's
much
a big
money
deal.
at the time. I know. And it was like, I think the starting salary, and keep in mind, this was like a long time ago, but I think it was like $30,000 or like $28,000, somewhere in there. And this was so much money to me at the time. Like,
Yes.
I was like, oh my gosh. Now I think I'm like, now, oh my gosh, you couldn't survive on, it's so hard to survive on that. But at the time, that was so much money to me. And the other thing was that I was like, well, you know what? In about a year, I am going to have to go do my student teaching for my graduate program. And you know what?
Mhm.
This will look really good on my resume. Like I can put on my resume that I've worked with special ed kids, but then I'm going to go leave and I'm going to go do my kindergarten teaching thing. But this will look really good. Also, at this time, it was really, really hard to get a teaching job. It was just a different, now you hear about how there's all these openings and things like that. But at this
Yeah.
time, it was really competitive to get a teaching job. So I was like, okay, this is going to look great on my resume. This is going to give me an edge. So I took the job. I left my preschool job. It was like I said, it was a school that was for specialized kids that weren't in their home districts. They were sent, to this district
Mhm.
because the district couldn't support them, which was pretty common at that time, right?
Yeah.
Much
Yeah.
more common to see more kids staying in their public school districts now. However, I was really bad at the job at first. I was used to being like, I'm going to admit that. I went from being everyone's favorite preschool teacher. I was that teacher that parents would request to be in my class. And then I don't know, I really was struggling, but I figured it out and I got better at it. And I I still had this plan in place, but I was like, I'm going to see this out. And then that was it. It was time. It was time for me to go to do my student teaching. And so I went to the principal and I gave my notice. I said, I have to give my notice because I have to go do student teaching, which was full time. Like you couldn't do that and still work a full time job.
Right. Yeah.
And she was like, okay, sounds good. I was like, I'll be done. And I gave him tons of notice. I was like, 2 months, something like that. She ended up pulling me back in, I don't know, maybe a week or two later and said, hey, if we could promote you to a teaching job here, because at the time my role was as a paraprofessional, and I could figure out how to get you your teaching hours to get you your teaching license, would you stay? And I was like, well, that's kind of a no-brainer because I'll be getting paid, right? I won't
Right.
lose
Right.
my
Yeah.
job, right? And so I said, sure. And they said to me, here's the caveat. You're going to have to work with the teenagers. It's a role with the teenage group.
Yeah.
And I think the youngest student in that class, this was a mixed group because, very small school, right? I think the
Right.
youngest student in that class at the time was maybe like 14, and the
Mhm.
oldest was maybe like, I want to say like 16, right? And up until this point, I'd only worked with small children. Even this classroom I was in, the kids were, I think the oldest kids in the class was like 7 or 8. So I was never worked with teenagers before. But I was like, all right, I'm gonna do it because I really enjoy paying my rent and stuff. And so they brought me into this classroom, and they said, hey, we're going to get you coverage in your normal position. Just watch. You're just going to hang out and watch for the day. And I always say this was this was it. This was the moment. At the end of the day, the teacher at the classroom at the time said, all right, everybody, it's time to go home. We need to pack up. And all the students in this classroom stood up and they got their binders out of the closet and they put their stuff in their backpack, and they got wet wipes and they cleaned their desks and they put their chairs on top of the desks and all that. And they were like, bye. And they walked out the door. And literally my mind was blown because this was a school that really was only inhabited by students with level 3 autism. These were more profoundly affected individuals. And so the young kids that I was working with at the time really needed just like this painstaking amount of intervention, right? When you work with really little kids, you're working with early intervention. It's real tedious.
Yep.
You're doing all this minutia all day long because they can't
Lots
do it
of
for
repetition.
themselves yet,
Mhm.
right? And that was the moment that it was like a light bulb moment for me that I was like, oh my gosh, this is why we're doing that.
Yeah.
And I think from that moment on, it really changed my perspective on not only what I was doing every day, but the value of it. And lo and behold, I ended up really liking working with teenagers. behaviors. I wouldn't have thought that at the time. And I continue to kind of enjoy that particular age group. Like I love little kids. Little kids are super fun. And I enjoy working with little kids. But I have a particular soft spot for like that upper elementary, middle school age, even to this day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so you just mentioned that you often worked with a lot of children that were highly nonverbal and maybe even had some co-occurring challenges like maybe ADHD or
Sure.
some type of emotional impairment. What are some of the common social skill breakdowns that you saw or still see in children that may have these types of concerns? And why do traditional methods sometimes fall short with our children?
Sure. So I think when you're talking about kids that are really significantly impacted by their disability, children that are maybe have some sort of cognitive deficit, maybe are not yet verbal, right? They don't have, doesn't even matter if they're verbal, more so they don't have functional communication, whatever that
Yep.
mode may be, right? Whether it be talking or typing or using the voice output, something like that. I think that social skills instruction in those instances tends to really focus on the mechanics of social skills instruction. So, how to ask for someone to share with you, or the steps of putting together Legos with somebody, or the steps of turn taking, right? And I think that's really valuable. And I think for children that do have more significant cognitive impairments, that's absolutely where you have to start, right?
Right.
For children that advance beyond that, right? Either because they become more verbally sophisticated rather over time, right? Because they just grow and mature and they learn more skills,
Hmm.
or they've always had the baseline of skill, even though they have some impairment. What we see is that the mechanical learning of those social skills only takes you so far. So they're very capable of learning the steps of sharing, but where things continue to break down is it like the devil's in the details, right?
Hmm.
So when is it appropriate to share and when it's not, right? So you learn, well, everyone should share. Sharing is important, right? We teach that to all kids. But what happens when somebody brings a toy to school and it's just for show and tell, and they're not supposed to take it out of their backpack, and they don't want to share it because it's just for this show and tell, and then it's going to go away and they don't want to, and the teacher says, you know what, they don't have to share it, right? Well, we just spent a lot of time telling this kid that they really needed to share and that everyone should share. And now they're really confused,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because they engage in the behavior that we taught them to engage in. Other things I think that get really tough are, again, like the nuances, right? So I'm very interested in general in that the label of problem solving, like how we teach kids how to problem solve. And particularly, I'm interested in teaching kids how to engage in social problem solving. So those that idea of like we have a conflict or something didn't go my way. But again, the devil's in the details, right? So we tend to teach social problem solving in the literature, even in this, there's like these 5 or 6 steps that everybody follows. Like first you identify the problem. And then you identify who the problem it affects. And
Hmm.
then you identify a few possible solutions to the problem. And then we try a solution, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you're taught to engage in problem solving, right?
Hmm.
And I think there's benefit in that, right? It absolutely helps you to develop problem solving skills. But again, what happens when the solution doesn't work? What happens when the solution isn't the one you wanted?
Mm.
So I did all the steps, but my friend is still mad at me.
Yeah.
Or I did all the steps and I still didn't get invited to the birthday party.
Hmm.
Right. And that happens a lot. And so that is where I think it really breaks down. Understanding the nuances of social problems. And absolutely, once you get into the teenage years, let's face it, those nuances get real sophisticated real fast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
right? I mean, if you ever worked with a middle schooler, seriously, like from 5th to 6th grade, it's like the world changes, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, now not only are you having to deal with all of these complicated social rules, but now the rules have become almost like hidden, right? Like they're under the
Mhm.
surface, right? Nobody
Yeah.
actually talks about the rules. Everybody's just supposed to understand them. And
Mhm.
now I have a deficit, right? I was having trouble understanding the rules when the rules were obvious. Now you're telling me that there's hidden problems, right? That's great. Like, so
Right.
I think that becomes problematic for kids. And then, like I said, dealing with problems when the solution doesn't go your way.
Mhm.
I think we're really, really good at teaching possible strategies for how to engage in social skills, address social problems, but we're not so good at teaching students how to kind of deal with disappointment or deal with things not going their way or coping when things are maybe just not so great in their lives. Right.
Right.
And that's, I think, where we really start to break down. And I think a lot of people are concerned about those issues. I mean, nothing I'm
Mhm.
saying is like super groundbreaking. If you look at just, I mean, even like the news or,
Mhm.
social media, people are talking about this stuff a lot.
Absolutely.
And I think we've made a lot of progress in terms of answering some of those problems, but we're not quite there yet.
Absolutely. And all of the things that you've mentioned are issues and concerns of social skills with all children, not just those who
Yeah,
suffer with
absolutely.
any
Yeah.
concern. Yeah. And even as a parent, I have a fifth grader going to sixth grade, and I'm the stuff you were saying, I'm like, oh my God, what are we gonna
Oh my
do?
gosh, middle school's the worst.
Yeah, like it is a scary thing. And especially with the world continuing to change day by day and things are happening and we have so much access to what is happening across the
Yeah.
world and it is all there and all in front of us all the time. Just being able to navigate those things and even as an adult having the appropriate coping skills is something that is a work in progress for sure.
Absolutely. And if you just look at data, so we have been attending to just people's mental health. I mean, this is not new, right? Since the 90s.
Mhm.
CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, that was founded in 1994 because they were concerned about kids' social and emotional health. So this isn't new, but what does the data tell us? It's gotten worse. Now,
Yeah.
there's probably a lot of reasons for that, right? I mean, you just mentioned kids and adults have more access to things than they ever did before, for better and for worse. And certainly that we had COVID, right? So there's lots of reasons for that. But what we're continually finding is that like the kids aren't all right. The
Yeah,
students
absolutely.
report that their mental health isn't great, and again, yes, even children that are not affected by some sort of disability, at least that we know of, are saying, hey, I feel bad about myself a certain number of times a day, or schools are reporting all of these referrals that they got for kids that are saying, "Hey, I'm depressed. I'm not okay." How many times have they had to send kids to the hospital, right? Because they said something
Mhm.
concerning, right?
Absolutely.
All of those numbers are up.
They definitely are. And we spoke just briefly about my work history. I kind of fell into public education and special education in similar ways that you did. But as a former school social worker within public school education, I know that there's no shortage of these SEL curriculums and programs. When you mentioned Castle and all of the other options out there that schools have access to, there's still gaps there. Can we talk a bit about what ACT therapy is and kind of how they begin to fill some of those gaps?
So it's actually pronounced ACT. So that you gotta always say ACT because that's what Steve Hayes says it's how we pronounce it. But acceptance and commitment therapy has been around for a long time. It does stem from the more behavioral tradition in psychology. More specifically, it really is rooted in what's called relational frame theory. And relational frame theory is how we relate things to other things. It's how we develop language. So if I were to give you a bunch of fill in the blanks, you could do it. So if I said a banana is and you would fill
Fruit.
that in. A banana is bigger than a,
Grape.
right. A banana is the same as a,
Plantain.
Right. So we could keep going, right? We could keep going like that, right? And we could do an
Yeah.
opposite of. You could even expand that and you could say something like, oh, when I told my son we were going to Disney World for the first time, he went bananas. So you could
Yeah.
turn that into a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So relational frame theory is a theory of cognition and language that really is how we relate things to other things. Neurodevelopmentally typical individuals do this without a lot of training. So if you tell me a banana is the same as a plantain, without you teaching me, I know that a plantain is the same as a banana. You don't have, like, I can figure that out on my own. And it gets way more complicated than that, right?
Yeah.
So I can then learn that a banana is the opposite of an apple, and that if an apple a day keeps the doctor away, maybe so does a banana, right? And like it goes on and on and on like that. And again, a lot of these relations you don't have to train. And you actually can relate even these larger like webs of concepts to other webs without a lot of training.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really super beneficial, right? It helps you to problem solve. It helps you to engage in critical thinking. It means that you can learn things without being exposed to them, right? So I don't have to do it to learn it.
Okay.
But it's also has like this darker side in that you can start to overgeneralize the bad stuff. So a common example is you meet a mean dog and the dog bites you, and this was a big dog. And so now you start to associate all dogs with biting you, right? And that's pretty common, right? Now
Yeah.
all dogs are scary to me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now all big dogs are scary to me. But now I see a little dog and maybe that's scary to me. And my neighbor's house is associated with a big dog. They have one in the backyard. And now I won't walk by their house because I know that dog might bark. And I went into a classroom and I saw a dog collar. And now I get scared because, oh my gosh, could there be a dog in here? So again, you start to overgeneralize this avoidance and this fear. And that's kind of a very simplistic example with the dog. But think about other not so great things that happen in your life. We get stuck on these rules, right, in our head, sometimes ones that we even make up, and they keep us from doing the things that we want to do. So you might have a child who says they want to make friends, but they generally avoid social situations because what they've learned is to relate friendship and social situations with some sort of aversive consequence. So they had one bad social interaction, right? They get some idea in their head or they somehow learn nobody likes me. They start to generalize that to all these other situations and kids and experiences. And now you have a really antisocial kid who's afraid to engage in social interactions because they have this idea in their head that nobody likes me and they're going to get rejected. So that's kind of the dark side of relational framing. And I could probably give you a million examples of how that sort of plays out.
Mm-hmm.
So what acceptance and commitment therapy seeks to do is it takes that idea of relational framing and it tries to basically tease that apart. So those damaging relations we make, those unhelpful things that we do, whether they be some sort of over behavior or like, just stories we tell ourselves in our head, it starts to try and tease them apart. And it does so through what's called the hexaflex, which are 6 core processes that are distinct from one another, but related. And the 6 core processes, in no particular order, are present moment awareness or mindfulness, which we obviously have heard a lot about just in general.
Mm-hmm.
Diffusion is this idea that you don't need to be, or you can remove yourself from your thoughts. So again, that thought, nobody likes me, I can engage in certain act-based exercises that helps distance me from that thought and realize that that is just a thought I am having. It is not a literal truth. You then have self as context. Self as context is probably the most challenging, I think, even for adults to understand. So it can be a little bit more complex for kids, but it's this idea that to some extent, I am always who I am, no matter the situation I'm in. So think about a tree. A tree is still a tree, whether it's fall or winter or spring or summer, right? But things about the tree changes. So I'm still me, regardless of my situation. But also, who I bring to the table in certain situations may depend on the context. And that's perfectly okay. I'm a different person at work, slightly different person at work than I am probably than with my best friend. I'm still me, I'm still Melissa, but there's elements of myself that sort of present themselves and how I behave in those different situations. Acceptance is probably the thing, at least in my opinion, that's most radically different from a lot of mainstream psychology approaches. Because in a lot of mainstream psychology approaches, the idea is something I'm thinking a bad thought or I'm feeling a bad feeling, and how do I change that? And how do I make that go away? Right? We're like inundated with that in our culture. Like reframe your thoughts, focus on the good, take a walk, listen to a podcast, right? All of that. And none of that stuff's bad. Like, yeah, you should go take a walk. That's good for you. Like you absolutely should do that. But there's been actually a lot of research that shows that when you are very focused on this idea of like, I have to be happy all the time, and cultures that put a lot of value on happiness, which I think we probably can agree American culture tends to do that. They sort of put a premium on you should feel happy and you should feel great all the time. Those people actually end up feeling worse when they have feelings like anxiety or depression or things aren't going their way, and they end up feeling a lot worse about themselves because they can't seem to fix it. So acceptance is really is kind of the opposite of that. It's, you know what, I feel anxious, or I feel not so great, or I feel depressed. And maybe I have to kind of lean into that a little bit rather than trying to push it away, because pushing it away doesn't really work. It just pushes it under the deck. Think about a boat, and I'm just pushing it below deck. I'm not really dealing with it, is really, really what it is.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean you shouldn't take your depression medication if you need to, or your anxiety medication, or you shouldn't engage in other behaviors that help alleviate those symptoms. But it is saying that it's like kind of okay to feel that way. Like it's okay for things to not be okay. And can you accept that things are okay and still do the things you care about? Which leads to the next process, which is values. And values are what you care about. Adults will often have kind of those larger esoteric things that they say they value, right? Being a good friend, being a good parent, feeling self-fulfilled. Adults typically be capable. Kids, once they've done acts, even really young kids, even after they've done acts for a little while, they can get there. They can talk about those things. Maybe not the same way you and I would, because they're still kids. But little kids will say, yeah, I want to be a good friend. Or like, I want my friends to like me. But realistically, sometimes it does start out as like much smaller things. They'll be like, what do you really care about? What do you value? And they'll be like, I care about playing Roblox. And there's really nothing wrong with that, right? Because you that's where it starts. You can sort of shape that up and get like, well, what is it that you like about Roblox? Oh, I really like playing with my brother. So it sounds to me what you really value is playing with your brother. It doesn't leapfrog quite that quickly, but you kind of get the idea.
Yeah.
And again, values are contextual. So what I care about at work is probably really different than what I care about at home. Not that there's never overlap, but it's okay to have different values in different places. So your values might be contextual, both because of setting or even because of the nuance of the situation, right? Maybe I want people to think I'm a good person, but if you're treating me poorly, even though I value people liking me and thinking I'm going to be a good person, now in this contextual situation, what I really value is you stopping engaging in that behavior, and I'm going to do something to make that stop, either by like removing myself from the situation or sticking up for myself or something. So your values can change. So once you kind of get an idea of your values, you then can engage in committed action. And committed action is those things that you're actually doing in service of your values. So if I say that I value being healthy until I'm old and gray, then going for a walk every day is a committed action. Can I engage in committed actions when it's hard too? So that kind of is where the acceptance comes in. So I am not in the mood today. The news is really overwhelming me and I am feeling a lot of feelings and it's really making me want to just sit in the couch and eat a pint of Ben and Jerry's. But I really value being healthy and being able to move and be fit as I age. So even though it feels really hard right now, I'm going to go for a walk. So that's that idea of committed action. You can teach the Hexaflex processes individually. Some people teach them in like components. So like some people they split the Hexaflex down the middle and they teach the mindful core, and then they call it the reinforcer core. There's a model specific to adolescents that's been used called the DNAV model, which breaks the Hexaflex down into 3 parts. And they have these almost like these avatars, like the noticer. So that's the person that like notices what you're doing. And so there's that model. So there's a few different ways to teach it. Ultimately, what you're trying to get to is, or which at the center of this model is psychological flexibility. And really what psychological flexibility is that ability to surf the wave. So sometimes you get calm seas and sometimes you get choppy seas. And can you surf the wave regardless of what's going on and get to this place where you are reacting to things in a more flexible way and also in a way that, again, is contextual. You know, we were talking about kids with disabilities before. Like we know some kids with disabilities, not all, but we know some kids with disabilities, one of the things they really struggle with is engaging with the world in a very rigid way, right? Or engaging with, and let's face it, even typical adults can do this. They engage in the world in a very rigid way. So this idea of like, I can engage with the world in a more contextual manner. And so that's basically what ACT is. At this point, it's very well researched. There's 30 years of research about relational frame theory, and then of course, acceptance and commitment therapy. It's considered evidence-based by the APA, the Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs, the WHO, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association, all say that ACT is considered an evidence-based intervention for a really wide range of things: depression, anxiety, chronic pain. Now more so, we're starting to see it more autism. We're starting to see that research is starting to become more prevalent. And then now, I want to say within the last 10, maybe 15 years, we've seen like a trickle out of ACT with kids.
Okay.
It's definitely more robustly researched with adults. Now like I mentioned, that DNAV model, we've seen that a little bit, and we're starting to see more ACT studies with kids. There was a meta-analysis done in 2020 by, I believe it was Fang. I can't remember the second author off the top of my head, but I know it was in 2020. And they looked at all of these studies on ACT with kids. And basically the outcomes are promising. It's certainly better than nothing. So it's better than treatment as usual. There's sort of a question still for particular diagnoses, things like depression and anxiety. Is it any better than traditional cognitive behavioral therapy? Early studies suggest like maybe not, but there need to be a lot more studies as to like, who is it most helpful with? The other thing we're starting to see is ACT almost as preventative. So we were talking about social and emotional learning in schools. We are starting to see ACT get infused either in full on, like this is an ACT-based curriculum in SEL, or it's somehow infused into some other sort of standing SEL curriculum. So we're starting seeing it applied in a more preventative way. So everybody gets some of it, and can it help over the long term? I know that there is at least one longitudinal study happening right now in Hawaii in schools that is looking at that is looking at like, we apply it to these kids, we're going to apply it the next couple of years, and we're going to compare them to another group of kids that didn't get it. What does stuff look like in terms of their tardies or their grades or their write-ups, their discipline write-ups,
Behavior.
things like that.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
Yeah. Because that was going to be my question, just kind of listening to the hexaplex of and all of the ideas and the things that go into it. It does seem like a school or a classroom could really use it to teach SEL strategies and be more, I guess, proactive instead of waiting for the reaction to happen. We just talked a lot about how our children are already struggling. And so being able to equip them on the front end seems like a much better approach to seeing some positive change, or not even seeing any of the, I can't say any of the negativity, but some of those negative behaviors that our children experience.
I've spent a lot of time in schools like you, Sharlee. I'm a certified teacher. I've spent most of my career, even as a board certified behavior analyst, in public schools in some capacity. And a lot of those curriculums are telling kids, or a lot of the rules are, you shouldn't behave this way, and this is why. And you should focus on the good stuff, or this is the appropriate way to act, and this is the inappropriate way to act. But again, what happens when you didn't make the soccer team and you're really upset about it, right? Or you just don't feel that good today, or you're in a fight with your best friend, right? And like, sure, you shouldn't be acting out in class just because those things happened. But if you're really focused on those things, just like all of us, right? When something stinky happens in our lives, we all do that. We all bring it to work with us and we're all like, I'm just not in the mood for this today.
Yep.
So now let's like take it a step further. So that's the stuff that happens to all kids. Everybody gets disappointed. Where I've spent a lot of my career are kids that have much more significant problems than that. So kids that are experiencing homelessness, kids who have either been abused or been exposed to domestic violence in some way, children that don't have enough to eat, children who have parents at home that have their own cognitive limitations and so can't provide them with the safe environment that they need, kids that have been removed from their parents. So now you're trying to tell this kid that the most important thing that they need to do today is their math. My life is a dumpster fire, right?
Yeah.
Like my life is a dumpster fire.
Like, how does math
everything in
fix
my
that?
life is terrible. Everything in my life feels really terrible.
Yeah.
You can't reframe your thoughts out of that.
No.
You can't positive thinking your way out of that. That is a real challenging situation they're in. And even if you have good supportive teachers and an environment at school, you still have to go home to that every day. So ACT, again, works in service of, yeah, you're right. Your things aren't so great for you right now, but can we be in the present moment? Can we accept that you didn't get to see your mom this weekend because she didn't show up to her custodial visit? You're right. That really sucks. That's real. You're right. I get why you're upset, hon. You know what? That's really terrible. Can we accept that that didn't go so great for us this weekend? And you're allowed to feel that way. Can we maybe try to be here with me in the moment with Miss Melissa? That's what I always make the kids call me. I never have them call me by my last name because I don't know. I just find that weird. I've always been Miss Melissa, so I continue to be Miss Melissa. But I'll be like, me and you are here in this classroom right now. So can we try to be in the present moment and me and you be here right now and work on this thing we're going to work on together? And you told me that something that you really value is being a helper in class. And so maybe we could be in this present moment right now. And then that really sounds like you be engaging in some actions towards being helpful, because if we can get through this right now and get through this activity, then I can get the whole class back on track. And then we can all get to recess later. And so you teach the hexaflex and you engage in these experiential activities around the processes in the hexaflex with kids. And then you really kind of infuse it into your day-to-day interactions.
Nice.
And the more you do it, the more kids buy in. And listen, I work with kids a lot of times with emotional behavior disorders, and those tend to be those kids that are particularly angry and particularly loud about it. Yeah, they are my favorite kids to work with, though. Those are I say they are my people. And like, has a kid said to me, I do not care about the present moment right now, Miss Melissa. Or like, you know what? Right now, what I value is breaking my pencil and throwing it across the room. All right. Like sometimes you win some and sometimes you lose some. But over time, you do see those kids start to turn a corner. You will see the more ACT language you use with kids, the more they start to use it themselves. Absolutely. The more they will start to say like, yeah, I'm really upset about my morning this morning. Me and my mom got into a big fight. I told you, Miss Melissa, that I really valued getting a good grade on this test. So I'm going to try to do the fluency facts right now. Cool. That's a win.
Absolutely. Yeah. For practitioners or school districts or school teams that are really listening to this and really are enjoying ACT and thinking about using it with their students, how immersed in the model do they need to be to use it effectively? What's a good place to start? We mentioned having curriculum. Is this something that they can find on a website? Like, how do they find out more and really begin to help their students?
Sure. So one of the best curriculums that I know of, and I'm a little bit biased because it's written by my academic advisor where I'm getting my doctorate degree and he wrote it. So obviously I use it a lot. But Dr. Mark Dixon's AIM curriculum, it stands for Accept, Identify, Move. And it's a pretty comprehensive curriculum. I know it's being used in schools already, and it's being implemented by teachers. So these are people that are not necessarily ACT. They're not a therapist, they're not a behavior analyst, right? Yes. They are teachers doing the good work that they do and trying to help their students. And I will say one of the things I like about those particular curriculums, in addition to having like all of the activities that you can do, the activities are aligned to the hexaflex. I know Dr. Dixon also has a lot of things in that curriculum aligned to the CASEL outcomes that are so important. Mm-hmm. There's also like the first 2 chapters of the book, like really just explain what ACT is. And then there's also like a behavior management component to it as well. Basically like a point system rather than like a traditional point system where it's like, you get a point because you were a helper today. You earn points based on, engaging in the hexaflex, basically. Dr. Dixon shows some of this film in his talks of them engaging in this stuff in classrooms, particularly in Hawaii, where he's doing a number of pretty large studies. Very recently, he also published what he calls the AIM Explorers. That is for very young children. So as young as like 3. So basically what he did with that particular curriculum was, I mentioned the hexaflex to you. All of the hexaflex components have a little animal associated with it. And you have like Pepin the penguin, and Pepin the penguin is representative of acceptance because he is a bird that has to accept he cannot fly. And so, it kind of makes the hexaflex a little bit more approachable for very young children. And then they can move on to AIM when they get a little older. So those are two actual curriculums that I'm very familiar with that are out there. There is the DNAV curriculum that is specific to adolescents. Again, like there has been some research on that has been shown to have some promising outcomes, the way they teach that. Dr. Steve Hayes, who's really regarded as kind of the father of acceptance and commitment therapy, really tried to make ACT accessible across disciplines. So how I engage in ACT as a behavior analyst is different than how somebody would engage in ACT as like a school psychologist, right? I don't do talk therapy, right? That's not what I do. I'm a behavior analyst. We do activities. We engage in direct behavior change. We're not just sitting here talking about, don't get me wrong. Once you're doing ACT with a kid, they're talking about their feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I probably do it differently than like a psychologist would do it, right? There are certain things that are outside of my scope that are in their scope and sort of vice versa. Also, as a behavior analyst, I'm pretty actively using relational frame theory and kind of dipping into like specific exercises around either strengthening a student's relational framing abilities, particularly those kids that maybe are not good at relationally framing, how to build new frames or take apart old frames. So I might do some of that with my students, which talk therapists are not going to do because that's not their scope.
Mm-hmm.
For teachers, I think that they're probably more focused on like the quote unquote a social emotional learning aspect of it. Anybody who I say wants to learn about ACT, but doesn't want to get bogged down in like the sciencey stuff, because I will tell you, many, many years ago when I first started learning about ACT, even I was like, I don't get this. I was going to journals, right? And I was trying to read journal articles. And I don't know, at the time, it really wasn't like clicking for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I bought the self-help book. It's a self-help book by Russ Harris called The Happiness Trap. And it is an ACT book. It's basically a self-help book for adults. And it's based on ACT. And I was like, oh, I get it now. And actually, I will send that book to friends. Like if I have a friend who's like going through something, I will go to my Amazon cart and I will like send them. I've sent people that book. Another really good book is Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life by Steve Hayes. Again,
Mm-hmm.
These are self-help books. They're not clinical books, but I think if you want to understand like what we're talking about when we're talking about ACT, those are like really super accessible places to start.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for those recommendations. You said the happiness track?
The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. He also has a YouTube page. I use some of his videos sometimes with kids. There's one particular video. I had this kid that really was into sushi, and he has this one particular video about like your thoughts can move past you, like on a sushi train, like at a sushi train restaurant. And he loved that video. We would talk about that video. This kid was really into sushi, so that video really resonated with him. I've actually shown that video to my son too, and been like, "This is what we can," because I have a child. He's a senior now. He's the school year is over. So he's a senior in high school officially now.
Wow.
I'm not okay.
I was just about to say, are you okay?
No, not really. I'm not. I mean, I'm trying to accept it, but not.
Man, because I'm like just going to 6th grade and you're a senior. That is heavy.
At some point, my son was like, I don't need another behavior plan. I was like, I think your behavior at school would say that information is incorrect. Okay. But anyway, yeah, the Russ Harris book. And then, Steve Hayes has a lot of books, but Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life is probably one of the ones. That's a good place to start. Again, if you're like a teacher or just like a lay person that wants to learn about acceptance and commitment therapy without having to dive into like the minutia of the research.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so as we get ready to come to a close, I know that there is a lot of research happening and some new curriculum potential for ACT interventions with preschool age children, maybe even some neurotypical children who have challenges. Where do you see or where do you hope to see the future of ACT going? What does that look like for other behavioral analysts like yourself? Like what's next?
I think the question is twofold. I think, in terms of where I hope to see it going is I hope we kind of get the word out there that this is a viable option. It's something a little different from, again, that mechanized teaching of social skills, which again, I think is important. I don't want to make it seem like I don't think that that's an important thing that kids need to learn how to do, because they do. There are many, many kids, neurotypical, neurodivergent, whatnot that need to learn like the hard skills of social skills, right?
Right.
But I think where ACT really come in is the gushier stuff, the less tangible stuff, like how to get through stuff when things are hard. What do I do when I follow the social rules and it doesn't really go my way? You know, I know you spent some time in school, Shirley. It's like we talk a lot about kids being dysregulated. That's like the new like
Yep.
buzz
Yep,
term.
that's
Like
the word.
everybody's dysregulated. Listen, I'm dysregulated. I get it, right? But you know, I think we're sort of putting a Band-Aid on those things sometimes. And we're like, well, we're going to squeeze our stress ball and go to the calm corner and we're going to take 3 deep breaths. And listen, again, I'm not saying those things are bad, but I don't think that they're getting at like the deeper problem. So I think something like ACT as both an intervention and potentially as a preventative strategy really gets at like the root of it. And I'm particularly interested right now. Some of the work that I'm doing right now is really I know I said I really love teenagers and I really do enjoy that age. But if we can get to kids when they're really little, right? We know when kids are really little, they're really malleable, right? Even their neuroplasticity is much more flexible, right? So if we can teach some of these skills when they're very young, right? Maybe we head off some stuff at the pass. So I'm really interested in, you know, almost going back to my roots a little bit, doing ACT with preschoolers, right? Both neurotypically developing preschoolers and not. And let's face it, most kids are, you know, if they're going to get a diagnosis in preschool, a lot of them don't have it, especially those kids, unless they're pretty cognitively and unless it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, I live in the state of New Jersey. I think the average diagnosis age in New Jersey is something like 4.5, 5. I live in a pretty on top of its state, right?
Yeah.
This is a state that's like people move here to New Jersey. I know that's crazy. You're like, people move to New Jersey? Yes, they do. We have very nice beaches, but people move to New Jersey in order to get services because we are known for having really good services here, both in school and out of school. And a diagnosis at 5 for something like autism is considered a late diagnosis. So if we can't do it till 5, it must be, and I know it's worse in other states. Preschool kids, you know, unless it's, again, something pretty significant is happening at that age, a lot of them are undiagnosed. And maybe we can start doing some stuff now, getting into not only public schools, but also into like those private preschool type programs, those daycare type programs. And we can start teaching kids so that they don't need the calm corner as much because they're starting to learn how to ride the wave and think about disappointments and things and they can kind of regulate themselves at a much earlier age, right?
Absolutely.
And again, we're not having to do as much intervention later, right? When kids are already, you know, when kids and then later adults are really like stuck. So that's one area that I see it going in more generally. I'm a behavior analyst and you asked about behavior analysis. I think when we talk about behavior analysis, we're seeing a real growth in the interest of acceptance and commitment therapy as a tool in behavior analysis specifically. Right now, something like, I haven't looked at the numbers super recently, but something like 70% of working behavior analysts work in autism. And that really has to do with the funding streams primarily. Now, I've really worked a lot outside of autism because I primarily worked in public schools, which I think is, you know, where you're going to be working with if you're a behavior analyst, because in a lot of funding streams right now in healthcare, if you're a behavior analyst in a lot of states, the only way you can get that therapy funded is through a diagnosis of autism. So I think one is that I hope that we see more behavior analysts getting trained in relational frame theory and behavior analysis. So this is a tool in their toolbox. Because when I talk to behavior analysts, I did a talk on ACT just a week ago for an organization. What a lot of people tell me is once kids become very sophisticated verbal kids, a lot of behavior analysts don't know what to do with them anymore. And they go, well, I got to send them to a psychologist if you can do ACT. Right? I mean, maybe you do as well. I certainly worked on interdisciplinary teams, but I've had many people call me and say, can I discharge this kid to you? Because I know you do ACT, right? And I don't know how to do it. Or like this kid has become too verbal or too sophisticated, or their problems, and I think they need ACTS, but I don't know how to do it. I think they need ARP-T and ACT. I don't know how to do it. My agency doesn't do it. Can I discharge them to you? Or do you know someone I can discharge them to? So
Yeah.
I really do hope to see more behavior analysts being able to do this work, because I think that will be able to help a lot more kids,
Mhm.
and a variety of different kind of kids. And then I think big picture, what I hope for, and I think a lot of behavior analysts hope for, is that we got pigeonholed into autism because we're good at it. And all that parent advocacy, right? From
Mhm.
parents who said we need this therapy. And it's been a wonderful thing. But now we seem to be sort of stuck there,
Yeah.
where people are like, oh, well, you can't do other things. And that's not true. Behavior analysts do tons of other things that have nothing to do with autism, some that don't even have anything to do with people or kids. So I think what I hope is that we continue to publish and we continue to show that we can get results in behavior analysis through ACT with children with a myriad of different diagnoses, and then get it more widely recognized and then ultimately paid for by, for example, health providers. So that way we can help more kids, because, the bottom line is, if you can't get it through your insurance for any of these families, they simply don't have access,
Mhm.
and only the people that have the money to pay for private pay have it. So that's sort of what I hope for behavior analysts, and, big picture.
Got you. Got you. Thank you for that. And so as we begin to wrap up today, where can our listeners learn more about you, ACT, and your work with Oceanview Behavioral Solutions?
Sure. So I have a website. It's www.oceanviewbehaviorsolutions.com. I actually just made an Instagram page. There's nothing really on it yet, but maybe by the time this podcast comes out, there'll be some action there. It's at Oceanview Behavior on Instagram. I'm going to be posting there. I'm pretty active on my personal LinkedIn account. So it's Melissa Connor-Santos. I post a lot of things on there. I talk about, I'll post my speaking engagements and things like that on LinkedIn, or conferences I'm going to be at. Primarily, my company does consultation. So it's really just me at this point. But, I provide consultation to companies, I provide workshops, and I also provide mentorship to individual BCBAs that are looking to become more proficient in areas such as public school work, ACT, and also what's known as skill-based treatment, practical functional assessment and skill-based treatment, PFA SBT. So I provide all of that. Within the next few months, I want to say I'm hoping to roll it out. I am planning on offering like a program for individual BCBAs that want to become more proficient in ACT, like a structured mentoring program. It's going to be 6 to 8 weeks, where you will come with a particular client in mind, and I will help you work in small groups. It's probably going to be a very small group that I'm going to offer to it at first as a pilot. It'll be pretty deeply discounted because I'm just getting it off the ground. And then we'll meet once a week and kind of go over case review and stuff like that. So if you go to my website, or, follow me on LinkedIn or Instagram, that will be rolling out, within the next month or two. So listeners can stay tuned for that, and hopefully they'll consider joining me on my ACT adventures.
Very nice. Well, Melissa, I, for one, will be following you on your socials so I can see what's coming up next. And I really appreciate you speaking with us today.
Absolutely. It was a great time. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and more. We're even on YouTube at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, please be sure to give us 5 stars and leave us a review. That helps our show get discovered and share the valuable insights in each episode. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.